Welcome to Refined Resilience. I'm your host, Carrie Hill, and on this podcast, we highlight the small moments that shape our journey toward greatness and remind us that resilience isn't linear. Each episode features stories of perseverance and the little victories that often go unnoticed, illustrating that resilience is about finding strength in everyday life. Well, my friends, I am so excited to be here today with Dr. Susan Madsen. I have gotten to know Susan over the past year and a half, and I can tell you she is the real deal. She is incredible, and she's doing amazing work in the state of Utah and beyond for women and girls. And I'm just going to read her bio because I won't do her justice if I don't. So, Professor Susan R. Madsen is a leading global authority on women and leadership, with her research featured in major publications like the New York Times and Forbes. A sought-after speaker, she has presented at prestigious venues worldwide, including the United Nations and various parliaments, and has conducted research and programs in over 40 countries. In addition to her role as the inaugural Karen Haight Huntsman Endowed Professor of Leadership at Utah State University, Dr. Madsen has authored 6 books. Oh my goodness.
And actually 9 now.
9 books. Wow. Okay. So she focuses on the development of prominent women leaders and advancing women's leadership theory. And this part is the thing that I've really attached myself to. So Dr. Madsen, she's also a change agent in Utah, founding initiatives like the Utah Women and Leadership Project and the Utah Women in Higher Education Network to support women's educational and leadership aspirations. Recognized with multiple awards, including the 2020 Utah Businesswoman of the Year, she actively contributes to community boards and national organizations. With a doctorate in work, community, and family education, she balances her professional achievements with family, enjoying time with her husband and her 4 adult children and grandchildren. She is the founder and purveyor of A Bolder Way Forward. Susan,
oh, thank you. Good to be here today.
You're amazing. I want to be your... Can we be friends?
Absolutely. I appreciate your asking me to join you today.
Oh, it's so fun. When I was thinking about International Women's Day coming up, there was a handful of women in my circle that I really, really wanted to highlight because you embody the spirit of what International Women's Day is. And so, I really appreciate you taking the time this week to talk with me. And we're going to just jump into this with you. So
sounds great.
Yeah. So for anybody, Susan, I know who you are and I'm familiar with your work. And it's been my joy to meet you on a few occasions in person and do some work with you. Advocacy work, through A Bolder Way Forward, and then also the Children's Justice Center in Salt Lake County. For women that aren't familiar with you and your story personally, I would love it if you could give us some background on your own personal story with regard to resilience and maybe also your definition of resilience.
I love that. So, I think my whole life, and it's the same for so many women, right? That we just, anytime you just keep standing up, you keep leaning into certain things, whatever we as women feel called to do. And I use that word very specifically because I've done research, I published. Calling can come from a higher power. Calling can be for people that are not religious or spiritual. But when you feel called to do anything, including mother or grandmother, right? That's a calling too. Or to use your head, heart, and hands in any way. That's important. That's critically important. And even more, the research says, important for women than even for men. And so anytime we stay standing and we lean in and we continue to do that, that's resilience. That's resilience. And so I think for me, I've always been pretty resilient, but I think having children and raising children, some really hard children, a few of them, has taught me so much resilience because and I've written about that in my books and articles because I have learned deeper, harder lessons from being a mother than anything else, as and you don't really have a choice as a mother. You just keep getting up, getting your kids up, getting them to school. You love, no matter how. My oldest son was so hard. And no matter what happened Every morning I got up and I loved that child. And we still, he's 37 now, and we still talk and we struggle in some ways, but he always knows he's loved. And so using that from not just mothering, but other kinds of things that have taught me resilience through the years. I've learned to have thick skin. So,
Mm-hmm.
so I
Yes.
remember a woman, well, a lot of women through the years, but I remember one who applied. I encouraged her to apply for a graduate program, and she applied for one, and
Mm.
she then didn't get accepted and kind of quit. And I'm like, my whole pep talk was how many failures I had, how many people had turned me down,
Yes.
how many. And then she was like, okay. And then she applied to three others, and then she started a graduate program and moved on. So it's really interesting. But we as women don't love
Mm-mm.
failures. We
Mm-mm.
want to have successes, right? And so I don't know, back to my comment about calling. When you feel like part of your purpose on earth is to do certain things. And one of mine is to do research and not just research, but research to application to change things in society. When you feel that call, I honestly don't think we have a choice.
Mm.
We have to be resilient. And when hard things come, it's easier if you feel called when hard things come to keep doing them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yes, I know. I so appreciate that definition, Susan, because I do think there's this element to resilience which says um, pre-prepare yourself, right? And I think
Yeah.
purpose fits into that
Yeah.
preparation of the hard challenges that might come.
Yeah.
And so, for women that are struggling to find their purpose,
Mm,
what would you how would you help women figure out what that authentic purpose is? And how does that feel, when you
I
find
love
it?
that. I love that question. And if I was doing a presentation, I uh, give you a few slides on this one because I talk about it often.
Yeah,
When
you
we, in
do.
fact, there was an
There was an
article over
article
10
over
years
10 years.
ago that came out of Harvard Business School, honestly, that talked about women's leadership development. And one of three elements was this purpose, that
Mm,
for women, finding that purpose of why they should have the confidence to use their voice, to speak out, to stand up, to lead in whatever way they feel, is one of the key things for women, because a lot of times women, we're socialized or we feel like, someone else can lead. My voice is not important. And
right.
and by the way, more often than not these days, Carrie, when someone says that to me, I say, that's crap. I just said
Yeah.
that's crap
Yeah.
because we're all need to do our best. This world is chaotic.
Yes.
Um, we all need to do our best and to lean in and really make the difference. In terms of that purpose question, what's interesting, there's an academic model, and I'm friends with the people that have published this, that talk about this calling purpose around
Mhm.
the edges. But in the middle of this model is one thing,
Mm,
and that is that you have to find your unique and distinct giftedness.
mm,
And oftentimes, when we're going around, what should I do next? We can find good things, but we as women have often been socialized not to talk about or acknowledge our gifts and talents and
mm,
strengths.
mhm,
But the key around true purpose, when we align our gifts and strengths to the world's deep needs, that connection comes when we understand the gifts and talents and strengths. Even it's not all about do we sing and play the piano and do all
right.
of these kinds of things, but there are unique ways that our minds work. There's unique ways that our hearts feel differently and we're passionate about certain things. And then there's unique ways that each of us use our hands, head, heart, and hands, right?
Mhm,
And when
mhm,
we understand what brings us joy, what we love thinking about, what we love understanding, um, what brings our heart skips a beat, maybe sometimes what we think, oh, what brings maybe a tear to our eyes, what do
Yeah.
we love doing? Do we love spending time with high school young women, right? Does that bring us joy, that mentoring,
Mm,
that combination? When we know that, then that deeper purpose becomes so clear that we need to use that. Let's not just show up and do anything.
hmm
But when we find that the true joy comes when we look at what we're gifted with and what's different about us than any other person that's ever lived on this earth. And that combination, nobody is like us.
mm,
And when we understand that gift
yeah.
and then take it to whatever that purpose is, sometimes we have to explore, but we
Mhm.
feel that, we think that. I know I'm being kind of long-winded here, but this I'm very passionate about this.
No, you're not being long-winded. I think this is a conversation that we should have more.
Yeah.
I think that clearly, Susan, you are so purpose driven and you
Yeah.
have found that niche, for you, your gift, in really bringing to light the deep issues of the world regarding women and children. And I think that is a calling. I don't think, when we think about nonprofit work, I say to people, when people who are thinking about getting into nonprofit work, and I always say, it's not for everyone. It's really not. Like, we want to all do good things, but actually being in the heart of the challenges, that can be detrimental and so overwhelming, right? That you feel like this tiny little thing that I'm doing is just not making any impact in the world. When in fact, to your point, the more that we raise our voice, the more that we stand up in the face of that hard, in our purpose, in our authentic gift for that thing, um, the world changes. That's when the world changes, right? That's when the thing starts moving.
Yeah.
Um,
And for people in Utah specifically, and I know you have followers around, but that's one thing that you mentioned, a bolder way forward.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
one thing is we have 18 different areas of focus. We're bringing everything together from health, mental health to women and money,
Mhm.
to reducing domestic violence and child sexual abuse, to increasing opportunities for quality childcare, whatever it is. There's so many areas for people to think about what connects to me.
Yeah,
What is most interesting? Maybe it's home, maybe
yeah,
it's family, maybe it's whatever it might be. And so we welcome everybody, and we have some people outside of Utah, quite a few engaged too,
awesome.
because Utah's their home in some ways as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and along those same lines, Susan, I want to speak to that, to this idea of leadership and execution on, purpose,
Mm,
in terms of resilience versus the support system of resilience, right? Because I think they're very different journeys.
mhm.
You are a leader. That's, obvious in the work that you're doing. And I think that is such a beautiful gift to know. Not only do I feel deeply about this issue, for me, it's divorce driven poverty. For me, it's the amount of people, that the amount of women that we have in Utah. In fact, your research is the basis for my advocacy work in this space,
Oh, I love
and
that.
my experience. And so I think when you're very clearly an executioner in this space and you bring people together. But in order to have a resilient movement of women and children and young, women, we all have to be in the engine playing
Yeah.
our part, right? And so I think sometimes when we think that we're not the leader, we don't have anything to offer, right?
Uh,
And so, I'd love it if you could share with me maybe some of the personal, thoughts or stories that have been shared with you about the support, being in the support space as someone's gift.
mm. I love that. I just remember a number of years ago. It's amazing that word support is really interesting, and
Mm,
even the word resources are
yeah,
really interesting because sometimes it's just a word or two or something you hear that can be a support. So sometimes I have people say, I don't have time to do this big thing or whatever, so I can't be
yeah,
involved.
Right.
And it's like sometimes it's the moments, sometimes they're small things. So one comes to mind a few years ago. I had a woman who I was traveling down. I think I gave a speech. This was a number of years ago in St. George,
Mm,
and a woman had shown up that had recently been divorced and had 4 kids, had no support, had no education. She, her neighbor brought her. And so I
mhm,
talked about the research and action and different things around why college was so important for women
mhm,
to
mhm,
go to college and graduate it. And she had had 1 or 2 years ago before she had kids. And she sent me an email many years later, and said to me, I just want you to know
mm.
that when I heard you speak, so I didn't even meet her in person. When I heard you speak, I went down later that week and signed up to go back to college. And I told my family I needed help. And she
Wow.
went back to college and she had 3 years left. But she was able, as a single mother with no support, 4 kids, 3 or 4 kids, I can't remember,
Mhm.
to go back. And this is what she said in her email. She said, I want you to know that I just later today am going to walk across the stage and I'm starting a master's degree at SU in the
Wow.
fall. And
Wow.
it was just the moments of listening, feeling that it touched you,
Mm,
and moving forward. I've heard so many stories and some sad, related to domestic violence, sexual assault. But when they have even just one person puts
mhm.
their arm around them, points them to resources,
Yeah.
and they feel that the arms physically or just metaphorically around them, it's amazing what one-on-one can be done, or just listening and
Mhm.
letting that inspiration come in. There's
Yeah.
so many stories, but that's one. And so that support, she felt somehow that support from me, even
Mhm,
though it wasn't a one-on-one.
mhm.
But then she went and she found her community. So the
I I thank you so much for sharing that, Susan, because I think oftentimes, and I'm just thinking of the one-to-one versus one-to-many, model, right? And social media, we have an opportunity as women in the world on social media to have that one-to-many impact. And
yes,
um, you get social media savvy the older you get, right? About what content you actually want to see and put into your life. And I feel like we have such a great landscape for offering that support to one another
yeah,
in really deeply meaningful ways. If I see another influencer selling me a zucchini slicer, I'm gonna die, right? It's like I want I want I mean, at some point I must have looked at zucchini slicers because that is the thing that's happening. But like I want to not only be a voice that draws people together and that women can feel supported in, similar to you. I also want others then within that small community or
I love
large
that.
community to go out and feel like they can do it too, like they
Yeah.
are supported in their dreams and their gifts,
And that's empowerment. And
yeah,
sometimes, especially in Utah, but with this political environment, sometimes we're so careful about the words we use and so
yeah,
forth. But I love the word empowerment, and that it can mean so many things, right?
yeah,
It can mean learning how to empower yourself to talk in more direct ways with your children. It can
hmm,
mean, getting out there and starting a nonprofit. It can mean so many
yeah,
different things.
yeah,
But we have to do better about supporting each other as women,
agreed,
bringing in male allies,
yeah,
supporting families, and all of that. I love that you focus on resilience. I do,
yeah,
because sometimes we feel like we can't do that certain things, and then maybe we pivot and give up. And
yeah,
sometimes that's appropriate. Sometimes you just can't keep beating things down. And I'm
right,
glad the suffragists did that for us so
yes,
we could vote.
yes,
But
yes,
sometimes we choose to go around or
hmm,
under or over, and get the job done in different ways. And that's resilience too.
Yeah.
It just means we find that purpose, that calling or purposes, callings,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And feel that. For me, it's religious,
Hmm.
but feel that this is what I'm supposed to do. Uh,
Yeah. I would love, let's do, if we can just stay a little bit longer in my, and it's my fault. I've taken you all over the place, but I do love this. I love I love the idea of talents versus gifts. I was
mm,
really digging into this a few months ago for myself, and I'm so happy that this is something that you're raising here because I thought, how do you know the difference between a purpose driven or a gift that then becomes an advocacy pathway for whatever that is, right? It
mm,
doesn't have to be
yeah,
political or
yeah,
social. It can just be the thing that you're passionate about. And what is it that creates a talent? And oftentimes I'd love to hear your thoughts. So I'm going to share with you what my observations are, and then I'd love to see what you
sure.
think. My thoughts were, gifts are that inherent essence. It's intangible. You can't, there's no way to describe to someone else what that is within you. It just is the driver of your life, right? And a talent is like, here's all the things in the world at your hands that you could play with. And when you hone in on it and you develop it and you work hard at it, it becomes a talent. But if you lose your fingers, and you don't, and you're a piano player,
Yeah,
you don't get to exercise the talent that you've created, but the inherent gift that you have to love music, to be passionate about that thing doesn't go with the absence of that physical extremity, right? And so for you, like, how do you define in your work, Susan, for other women when you're doing workshops, how do you tell them to find that gift? What are the steps
I
that
love
you
that.
went through to really know what your gift was versus just a talent that you enjoyed?
I love that question. So I define gifts, talents, and strengths a bit differently than you do.
Okay.
So in terms, and I write this, I have a Latter-day Saint book that I
Mm,
call that's called A Future Only God Can See for You. And
amazing.
I
Yes.
have a chapter where I define this. But the way I define gifts are those things that are just given to you.
Yeah.
And so having two parents in the home, two parents that were good at finances, I had food on the table, I have opportunities, the expectation for me to go to college was already there. And so they're kind of, we have to, some people don't like the word privilege, but they're
Right.
privileges that I have.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And I had a father that was really intuitive and taught me how to reflect on certain things. And I had brothers to play sports. So it
Yeah.
was a gift to do all of
Right.
that. So talents then and strengths, I define really the way that Gallup does.
Mm,
I'm a strengths finder coach.
mm-hmm.
And so talents I define as very different than gifts, but those and in Gallup, they're reoccurring patterns of thought
Right.
and behavior. The things that our mind does differently and we're pulled to in different ways. So it's in that. But in the way that they define it, you have these natural abilities, thinking
Mm,
patterns that are just natural in your system. They're in the synapses, in your
mm,
neurons in many ways, but they're not strengths until you do something with them. And so I
yeah.
think we have,
Yeah.
and so it's like you have to be there, you have to do that, and then it's a strength because you're practicing and doing it. So a lot of times, some of I've heard things, some of the best runners in the world, we'll never meet them because they didn't practice, right? Um,
Right.
and so for me, in Strengths Finder, I'm a achiever, I'm an activator, I'm a strategic, I have responsibility. I feel that very heavily. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
learner. And so I've been able through the work that I've done, being in the career that I've done and going in the direction to hone every single one of those. Those are
Yeah.
naturally what I like. And I've gotten pretty good. I've still got a ways to go, but
Yeah.
so a little bit different, but when you look at the purpose, understanding, wow, I'm really good at this.
Hmm.
This connects. I'm good at being in a meeting, listening to people,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden I can bring and say something that brings everything together.
Hmm.
And most people don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you think that, and then you realize, which women don't do all the time, you realize actually that thing that comes so natural, actually most people can't do that.
Mm,
That's a gift, but we don't
yeah.
see them as gifts, and or that's we just think they're easy for everybody.
Right.
So
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, I really appreciate that, Susan, because I think that requires us to be present. Resilience also requires us to be present in experiencing what we're experiencing, because if we don't stay
yeah,
in that moment to recognize how we are responding to it, we don't learn from it,
yeah,
right? And which means that it's a hindrance then to progression in the next space. And so, when we think about, and I really appreciate the strengths finding, hero in you. Is there like a category for Wonder Woman? Just circle that and you're good.
you're so
So,
kind.
but I think,
But it takes, can I just jump in? But it
yes,
takes, if we're trying to stay in our comfort zones,
yeah,
we're not going to develop strengths. We're
yes,
not, because it's uncomfortable. So when we actually get out there, do something that makes us uncomfortable, we actually are practicing, and we have to learn how to do failure good.
yeah,
Um, and that's part of resilience.
mhm,
But we also need to make sure and give ourselves grace so
yeah,
much,
yes.
and not because something didn't go well, not turn and say, I'm done, I'm
I'm
done.
done. Right.
Let's say, okay, I'm going to do this better the next time.
Yeah.
I'm going to try a different conversation with my teenager or something,
Yes.
and try
Yes.
a little bit differently. And
Yeah.
then you're like, give yourself credit if it went a little bit better the second time, instead of saying it wasn't perfect.
It
We're so
wasn't perfect.
perfectionistic,
Yes.
which
Yes.
I will tell you, perfectionism
Yeah.
is destructive
Oh my goodness.
to
Yeah.
confidence,
Yes.
to getting better,
To
to
love, to
silliness.
everything,
Yeah, I
everything.
love that. I love that.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I want to come back to, the preparation that we talked about before. And like resilience, half of being resilient is preparing to be a resilient
Yeah,
person.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And so it's like you can't get a driver's license until you drive the car X many
yeah,
hours. You
yeah.
can't, to your point right here, you can't know the thing or be an expert in the thing or see what your gifts are through the challenges unless you're
No,
leaning to it.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, a strange one I found a number of years ago. I was in a leadership position in my church for a women's group,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in Southern California. This was so many years ago.
Yeah.
And I had to, this is going to sound weird, but I had 5 funerals in my congregation in a
Wow.
matter of like a year or two.
Wow.
And I had one of the male leaders say to me one time, he said, "You have a gift in
Mm.
talking to people about death."
Mm.
And I'm like, oh wow, that was like a weird one.
You're like, I
But
have
I'm
really mixed feelings about that
but
compliment, I
I
think.
but I was able to, in fact, one of the people that died was in my position. I had
Oh, wow.
counselors, and
Wow.
she had had breast cancer before, and I was the one that could talk to her and sang to her as she passed away,
Mm.
and then helped. And I thought, what an awkward, like that's a hard situation, but unless I, stepped forward, I wouldn't realize that gift.
Right.
That's a really weird example. I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. No, but I appreciate that because I think it is the uncomfortable things. Like gifts don't have to be only for the beautiful.
Yeah.
For the beautiful moments in life, right? Gifts can
Yeah. Yeah.
be that you are the support pillar or the comforting voice of someone in their darkest hour, in your darkest
That's
hour.
good.
You can
Yeah.
be that for yourself
Yeah.
too. Um, so Susan, I want to take this conversation and I want to blow it up to the larger landscape of resilience for womankind, if you will, right? Um, I have made and I'm engaging in conversation with you, so I want your opinion on this. But my observation of what has happened in the state of Utah specifically, just because I'm here and I can see
Yeah.
it, over the past few years, is that women are really younger women, women our age, they are really elevating themselves. They're not waiting. They're not asking for permission. They are seeing problems and they are trying to find ways to step into it and be the solution. And I think that's a
We're
big,
starting.
yeah, we're starting it. Yeah. I can feel the swell of that happening, you know? And so in your opinion, and this is a call in my mind to, this is women being resilient from years and years and years of cultural, you know, frustration and cultural repression, and also just perfectionism and all the things that we've been taught. We're so ready for it here
Yeah.
in our
Yeah.
state, right? And so for you, what is the call to action for women collectively to be resilient in society?
Well, especially right now, like
Yeah.
there is pushback in terms of acknowledging even gender in some ways, nationally
Yeah.
and locally. So there's this pushback. I know in Utah, our women's resource centers on our campuses have been closed,
Yeah.
and so forth. So it feels like we've gotten this energy to move forward, and then it's coming back. And I think everyone in the country would
Yeah.
say the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And I many times a day, these days are saying we can't stop. That's what
Mhm.
the people that are trying to push us back want us to do. But
Mhm.
for the good of, and sometimes we don't do this for ourselves, right? We as
Yeah.
women have a hard time doing stuff for ourselves sometimes. But facials are good. Can I just say that? Um, but for the good of our children,
Yeah.
my grandchildren, my
Yeah.
neighbors, my my people in my congregation, whatever it might be,
Mhm.
we have to lean in because we have to do the work of more women having voice and
Mhm.
being leaders, because
Mhm.
what we know is this, that we will not get our domestic violence rates down. We will not be able to better protect our children from abuse, from child sexual abuse, from, all of these ucky things. We cannot stop. We have to do more to get those rates down. And what we
Yeah.
know from the research is that women must move forward to do that. We wish men would do that too, because there's a
Yeah.
lot of good men, but
Yeah.
it will be the women that have the voice to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So, if we say, well, let's just wait until this chaos is over, who knows?
Mhm.
We cannot stop. We
Mhm.
have to lean in, and it will take everybody. So if we care about girls and women and families, boys and men, man, we
Mhm.
need to work with them too, because our
Yeah.
violence rates across the countries, our sexual violence rates are increasing, not decreasing.
Right. Right.
So it is about resilience, but there's different kinds of resilience, right? It, it
Mhm.
it's some of it's mental
Yeah.
mental resilience.
Yeah.
But it takes community, Carrie. And I'm
Yeah.
so glad you're doing this podcast, because we need to feel part of this community. And that's what the work of Boulder Way Forward really is. And for people listening, real quick, that is just, everybody has the same issues that we do. We just, in more religious and conservative societies, you tend to have more
Mhm.
sexism, more differential, in
Mhm.
terms of men and women and power and those kinds of
Yeah.
things. Um, but we're like, naturally, when you look at how many decades will it take to really make improvement, we're like, we don't have 3, 4, 5 decades. We
Right.
want to do this in
Right.
7 years.
Yeah.
So we're a year and a half in now, a little bit more. And so, but we're just not taking one piece. We're saying we have to shift everything together. So it really is a movement. And if you want to make change, we can't just talk about it at the top. We need
That's
to
right.
get into every county, every city, every neighborhood, every congregation, every business, and
Yeah.
every home.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm so, and thank you for sharing that, Susan, because I do think there's women who are not yet familiar with the Boulder Way Forward as a collective organization that's doing some of this work. And also these spokes that you've created are also taking on legislative responsibilities and advocacy work, which is so beautiful that you've put this engine in motion for women to feel empowered to do that. Um,
And
I
it is just one more quick thing.
yeah,
It is, I mean, the model is not starting from scratch. So
no,
it
sure.
is bringing all the partners, government,
Mhm.
business, nonprofit, everything together so that we're not just doing pieces and parts, that
Yeah,
we're collectively working together to shift and change things. So just wanted to put that out there.
yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think something that's really important that you touched on was, we have to have male allyship.
Oh,
We do
yeah.
have to because what I think this my desire, my personal desire, I can't speak for anybody else, Mary, but my personal desire in this space is that because women are elevating, we encourage men to elevate with us. Come out of the comfort zone of where you have been able to live for such a long time in without a lot of change, pretty status quo for many, many years, and come into our world a little bit. We're inviting you in. We want you to see the struggles that we have, and we want your help. We're asking for that. We're not trying to push you away. We are opening the door to you.
Yeah.
And I
It's
think it's a
uncomfortable,
beautiful,
like you said, for them because they're in a
yes,
space too. So we need to find, and we have some curriculum and
yeah,
discussion groups for men too.
yeah, yeah. And but we want them to understand the resilience that
Mm,
we have created for ourselves, we have lived in, we have experienced, we have curated resilience as women since the dawn of time,
yeah.
right? I mean, this is so we
Mhm.
are asking them, be resilient with us, help us, because we will increase your productivity in the business
Yeah.
capacity. We will be amazing women and leaders for your families and your communities. We can effectively make deep impact if you let us in,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like, right? And you have to really be empathetic. And so I know there's a lot of women who don't really want male allyship. It's like they're so anti
Yeah. That's
male
not where we're,
partnership,
it's
right?
not helpful. It's not
Right,
helpful. That is
right.
not helpful.
Yeah,
And Carrie, there's so many more men, and we've got to figure out better ways to bring them in. I
yeah,
think who care.
yes,
When I speak sometimes and talk about teenagers and children and our daughters, I have a lot of men come up after, and they know the world more. They know their
yeah,
daughters need to be prepared, and so
yes,
they're worried about their daughters,
yeah,
and want that.
yeah.
And sometimes we don't see it though. Women and men, we don't see the issues. I have people telling me that every day. We have violence rates.
Oh
Women
my
don't have
God.
equal voice. I'm like,
Yeah,
okay, start opening the eyes, read,
right,
be informed, be
right.
educated, and then start sharing.
Yeah. Do you know, it's so interesting. I've shared, I was having this conversation with a philanthropic family, the other day, one of the fund manager for a philanthropic family. And we were talking about all of his work, internationally, and how beautiful it was to help women and children internationally. And it is beautiful. I love that. And I said, did you know that there are, you know, about 11 to 13,000 women in this state with 3 to 5 kids at any given time who are living on welfare with a max of $3,000 in their pockets every single month. Like
Yeah,
we have an opera, and and of course the eyes got big. What? Like I had no idea. And so I feel like when you're having conversation, Susan, it's just conversation,
yeah,
right? We're
it
not
is.
this, and advocacy starts literally right there with trust and connection and empathy and discussion. And I love that A Bolder Way Forward is trying very hard to bring those discussions in a sincere, authentic manner to the table for all parties who want to see their children
Yeah,
grow up in a different space,
yeah,
And so when you share that information that you're working so diligently to put together with people who have that money, who have that power, who have that influence, in a very candid, loving
I love that.
way.
Yeah,
They're just sharing stories. Now the storytelling is the catalyst
yeah.
for the actual partnerships, right? And so I appreciate your platform because
Mm,
I think it gives women a chance to share their stories. so that they can connect with people in influential spaces. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'm so
Yeah.
glad you're connecting with those stories. So we have a way to do some research and stories, but as it moves forward, this is why we brought so many partners. We have 300 to 400 partners, but we need to
Amazing.
get to thousands, right? In
Yeah.
the next
Yeah.
few years,
Yeah.
is I think we need to find better ways to share women's stories and male allyship stories,
Yeah.
right? So
Yes.
that people
Yes.
can think, wow, I could do that.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I was talking to a man who has every week, once a week, he has his biking group, even in bad weather, and
Yeah.
he has been giving his group of men little tidbits of data
Mm,
every time, every Saturday. He just gives them a little bit.
that's
Did you know
awesome.
this is the something about women in
Yeah.
entrepreneurship?
Yeah.
Do you have, and we have great two pagers that give you a little bit
Mm,
about each one on the websites. And so those moments matter. And
yeah.
when more people know, and
Yeah.
then they understand the resources, then they understand pieces, just starting to know
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
little bit can change
Yeah.
things. They'll start thinking, huh,
Yeah.
am I seeing behaviors that there could be abuse in this home of
Right.
my good friend?
Right. Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. Because you can't see what you don't know.
yeah,
You're not, nobody's telling you to look for it. So the fire's way over
yeah,
there. And,
that's true.
oh, well, it doesn't bother me. Right. So we just like move on. So it's like, unless you say, hey, did you know that this fire impacted, you know, 1.5 million people, all of a sudden it gets real, right? Like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah,
that's a thing,
yeah.
So Susan, I really appreciate this conversation. And I do think that, societal resilience is an important topic. Um,
Yes.
can't just run around scared, living in fear and scarcity for the rest of our lives as a society. And I think there is a lot of fear mongering that prevents us from seeing where the possibilities are for resilience. And so, as we um, kind of close out this interview, because I could talk to you for hours, but I know
Oh,
other things
same
to move
here.
on.
Yeah.
So, what would you say, Susan, in your work and in your personal life and in your observations of the world right now, not just for women, but for all humans, um, what would you tell them to focus on that will make them more resilient in the face of the things that we are trying to navigate right now in society?
Oh, that's a big question. What would I say in a
Wow.
few words? And so I think I would say first, well, based on what we've talked about, if you're a woman,
Yeah.
I would say, sometimes we think we understand ourselves, we know, but there's deeper work to do to really understand those gifts, talents, and strengths that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And then, and we actually have some curriculum in Boulder Way Forward now for small groups of women to meet together for 4 different times and
Mhm.
have discussions. It's led by a video. So have lots of
That's
resources
awesome.
right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, to talk about it and get comfortable with other women to talk about those gifts. And the last lesson, the last discussion of that is about now let's think about purpose.
Hmm.
Um, and I think I meet women all the time that are like, thanks for what you're doing in this and that, but they don't see themselves
Mm-hmm.
as influencers. But I will tell you, one voice matters. One
Mm-hmm.
voice matters. And so, and one heart matters, right?
Yeah.
And then one set of hands matter one by one. And we're used to doing that pretty well.
Hmm.
But combining forces to then make societal change and start pushing back on things,
Right.
saying, no, we're not going to stay silent anymore. We
Yeah.
have to do better. That's going to be a key. So, first, for women and men listening in,
Hmm.
to really understand women and help mentor your women or tap them on the shoulders
Yeah.
saying, hey, look at that. But then also education. I'm always
Mm.
going to say education.
Yeah.
So just even looking, if you're listening beyond Utah, look at your stats on safety and security. Look at your stats on women in the workplace,
Hmm.
right? Are there issues with sexual harassment, childcare,
Right.
whatever? Just educate yourself about all of them We have these nice little 2-pagers that give you a little bit, a few minutes each. Those are the two big ones, I would say. What we know is this: sometimes we as women have to get thicker skin. Here we go. A little bit. We have to practice leaning in when we feel uncomfortable and using our voice in productive, educated, informed ways. And then pulling in other people. That's what we
Yeah.
need.
Yeah.
Just pulling in friends, pulling in family, and saying, what are we going to do as a family, an extended family?
Mm-hmm.
Do something that really matters. I'll
Mm-hmm.
tell you from experience, sometimes it just starts with one. And then you hear years later from a woman that was a single mother with 3 or 4 kids that is now in graduate school, right? That those small moments mattered to more and more people, and you get into hundreds and thousands, and sometimes you never get that. You don't know, right? Um but everybody can do that, and that's what we need in a bolder way forward. That's what we need. We've got to do better, and I would say every state has
Mm-hmm.
to do better too. So
Susan, I love this. You know, the tagline for the podcast is greatness is found in the moments that make us.
I love
And
that.
so that was
I
just
love
so
it.
perfectly aligned with your story. And I just so appreciate that because I know that to be true for myself as well. It's not the big moments. It's the tiny little everyday. What am I going to do to grow in my gift, to grow in my purpose, to understand myself better in situations that I am afraid of and I
Uh,
do feel helpless in, right? How can I get up out of that? It's a moment,
yeah,
right? That can change your
it
life.
really is.
Yeah. Susan, you are fantastic.
Thank
Let's do
you.
this again. Let's do this
Yeah,
again.
absolutely, absolutely.
And we'll get into it further. So I so appreciate you. I want people
Thank
to
you.
go to abolderwayforward.org. Where else can people go to find more information about the work you're doing?
Well, that is the best place on Boulder Way Forward to get information about that. Our more general website for the Utah Women in Leadership Project. By the way, we have about 30,000 that follow, and
Wow.
probably 3,000 are not in Utah. And we have a
Wow.
whole following in Europe. I've speak in different parts of the world, and so there are resources not just for Utah, but
Yeah.
for other things. So you can go to utwomen.org.
Okay.
So if you want to get engaged, please do in the Boulder Way Forward. There's some contact information, a little survey if you want to lean in. And there's so many good places within your local counties. But
Mm-hmm.
as we have spokes, we have working groups, we have impact teams on
Yeah.
lots of different topics. So
Yeah.
welcome
Amazing.
everybody in.
I love that. Well, the next time you go to Europe, just remember to call me, you know.
Okay.
Let me know. I'll support you. I'll be
Okay,
the
there
champion
we
in the
go.
back of the room. So, Susan, thank you for this so much.
Thank
I
you.
so appreciate your time. It is an honor to have you, from the United Nations floor to my
Oh,
podcast. Thank
thank
you
you.
so very much for the work
Thank
that
you.
you're doing. And I wish you all the best. And we are working together. So we will have
Yep.
much deeper conversations outside of this podcast too. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Refined Resilience. We hope you found inspiration in the stories shared and the small moments that remind us all of our strength. Remember, resilience is built not just in the big challenges we face, but in the everyday experiences that shape who we are. A special thanks to our sponsor, Build Them Bless, for making Refined Resilience possible. Until next time, remember, it's the small moments of resilience that make us great.